Welcome to Affluence and Advocacy, NY Real Estate Law.
Hello and welcome to Affluence and Advocacy, New York Real Estate Law with Natalia Sishodia, the podcast that gives you expert insights into New York City's intricate world. Whether you're a high net worth individual, a foreign buyer, or simply looking to navigate the complexities of the New York City property market, this show is your essential guide. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Shielding Your Wealth, Asset Protection Strategies in New York. Natalia, so great to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Kevin. Nice to be here. Thank you.
So what exactly is asset protection, and what are maybe some misconceptions people might have about it?
So asset protection is the process of structuring your assets, whether it is a real estate investment or a business, in the way that protects them from future creditors, lawsuits, or estate taxes. There is a common misconception is that asset protection is only for the ultra wealthy people doing something shady. But this is not actually true. We, for example, recently advised to a family planning to purchase an apartment in Manhattan. This particular family was exposed to U.S. estate taxation and needed to protect their assets for the next generation. So what we did, we structured the purchase through an LLC that was owned by a foreign trust. It helped them to shield the asset, avoid probate, and reduce their estate tax exposure. Asset protection is really about being proactive and responsible. It is for anyone with something to lose.
All right, well, that makes sense. Yeah, I could see that being a misconception that people are like, oh, if you're not super rich, then you don't need it. But yeah, you're right. If you have something to lose, then there's something worth protecting.
Correct.
Yeah. So what types of assets are typically vulnerable and might require special asset protection planning?
I would say that the most vulnerable assets are real estate, closely held business interest, savings, and investment accounts. So those are the assets that are more at risk. Professionals like doctors, attorneys, and landlords are especially exposed. For example, we worked with a doctor who owned several rental properties. Given the high risk of lawsuits in both his medical and real estate life, we created a structure that held each property in a separate LLC and layered in an irrevocable trust to separate the ownership. That particular planning provided a strong firewall while also preserving control through the trust provisions.
Okay, so speaking of that you mentioned the separate LLC in your example. What are the advantages and disadvantages of incorporating LLCs or other entities for asset protection?
I would say that LLCs offer great liability protection by separating your personal and business risks. And they can also help with estate tax planning. But for sure, they are not a one size fits for all solution. Take, for example, a client who wanted to use their newly purchased New York apartment as a primary residence, but also wanted to own it in an LLC for protection. We advise them that doing so would disqualify them from the star property tax abatement, which is, I would say, approximately worth about 17% in savings.
Well,
because the property wouldn't be in the individual name. So these particular clients, they had to weigh the pros and cons of the transfer. I would say that protection is important, but so is understanding the tax and ownership consequences.
okay. All right, so can you kind of talk about the steps that can be taken to protect assets from potential creditors or lawsuits in the future?
One powerful step is setting up an irrevocable trust. We've done this for many high-risk professionals like doctors and lawyers who are more likely to face litigation. For example, we had a client who was a doctor to set up an irrevocable trust to hold his investment assets and protect them from future malpractice lawsuits. The assets were legally out of reach of future creditors, while still allowing him to benefit from the income in a controlled way. Timing is everything. This has to be done before there is any claim or pending lawsuit.
Yeah, that makes sense that you got to do that before that for sure. Okay. All right. So what are the implications of transferring assets to family members or trusts for asset protection purposes?
Transferring assets outright to a family member can backfire in a big way. For example, we had a client transferred his real estate and his business assets into his brother's name, thinking he could keep it safe in the family from any future liabilities. In reality, that particular transfer turned into the disaster with complicated tax issues, a broken relationship, and the sense of entitlement from the brother that made things worse than if he'd done proper planning.
Mm-hmm.
Another heartbreaking example that I can give you here that comes to my mind is an elderly client who transferred his beach house to his son during his lifetime. A year later, he wasn't even allowed to stay there. He wasn't invited, he wasn't allowed to come. The property was already legally in his son's name and their relationship deteriorated. So instead of an outright transfer, we always recommend trusts because trusts can protect assets while preserving control and flexibility. Plus, a properly drafted trust provides a step up in basis, which can significantly reduce capital gain tax if the property is later sold. That by itself is a huge benefit that gets lost when assets are gifted during the lifetime instead of passed through the trust on an estate.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I would not have expected that to happen in that situation, but that's yeah, that's sad. That's super sad. Important to be thorough with your planning, clearly. So once someone has asset protection strategies in place, how frequently should they be reviewed and updated?
I would say that the asset protection strategies and the plan should be reviewed and updated at least once a year or after any major life change like a marriage, divorce, a new child, retirement, or significant change in a net worth. For example, we had a client whose estate plan was drafted 12 years ago by some other estate planning council. He came to us to review what is going on there and make the changes. But actually, his plan was done 12 years ago. Since then, he had some changes like children grew up, one got married, family bought a new real estate, and the tax exposure changed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the original plan was no longer reflecting the goals and the risks that client face. Ideally, we like to encourage our clients to sit down for an annual check-in. Life evolves and your real estate and assets. Protection plan should evolve with your life changes.
Makes sense for sure. So then, can asset protection planning make things easier for your heirs, especially compared to simply relying on a will?
Absolutely. A will alone just means your loved ones are headed to probate court, a process that is public, slow, and often expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes very frustrating for the family. For example, we had an elderly client who did everything right. He created a will. He created a living trust, titled his assets properly into the trust, and designated beneficiaries. When he passed away, his family was able to avoid probate entirely. There were no delays, no court involvement, and no drama. His children were incredibly grateful because they were already grieving, and the last thing they needed was a legal battle.
Mm-hmm.
Asset protection and estate planning go hand in hand, not just for protecting wealth during the lifetime, but for ensuring a peaceful transition after you're gone.
That makes a lot of sense. That's great insight, and thank you for that. And thank you for listening to Affluence and Advocacy, New York Real Estate Law with Natalia Sishodia. If you want more insights, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll have plenty of great content coming your way. Natalia, it was so great having you here. Thanks so much for all the insight.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure being here today.